Hello. This is our second video in a series about lighting. And in this video, I'm going to focus on the California energy efficiency standards and how they will affect the way that you design your lighting. So you will mostly find this information in the resource that I've given you. It's shown on the screen right here. It is the residential lighting guide produced by the California Lighting Technology Center of UC Davis. Now this lighting guide is specifically for the California 2016 code. You may realize that the 2019 code changes are coming very soon. However, they have not made any major changes between 2016 and 2019 in the residential lighting standards. So your 2016 standards are still going to apply. So the California energy standards are located in the California Building Code. They're in Title 24, Part 6, if you're looking for them. Okay. All residential buildings must meet a set of mandatory requirements. They're in two categories. One is high efficacy lighting, and the other is lighting controls. Remember the word efficacy from the last video means kind of the efficiency of your lighting source and how much visible light it will put out compared to how much electricity that it uses. These standards are, as I said, mandatory, and they apply to all new construction, to additions, and also to alterations. So let's look at the first kind of mandatory requirements, and that's for high efficacy lighting. California requires lights to have an initial efficacy, right here in this table, of greater than or equal to 45 lumens. Okay. They require all lights that you specify to meet some requirements called JA8. That's labeled for the specific appendix to the code that this requirement is in. So your lights have to be JA8 qualified. And that mostly means that they hit that initial efficacy of greater than or equal to 45 lumens per watt. All right. There's also requirements for color temperature and color rendering index, dimming level, flicker, etc. So what does that greater than or equal to 45 lumens per watt mean? Take a look at this table that I've provided for you right here. It is a table of efficacy of light sources over time. It turns out that as our technology has improved, we have increased the efficacy of many of our light sources. The color coding legend is down here. So we can see that this light green color right here is the incandescent light bulb. Invented, looks like just after 1880. It has a low efficacy. And we made some small improvements over time, but here we are, and the maximum efficacy of your incandescent light bulb is still less than 20 lumens per watt. Your fluorescent lamp, this yellow one right here, was invented, looks like a little bit before 1940. Started out with a reasonably low efficacy, and we've made some improvements over time. So here's where it is roughly today. The compact fluorescent lamp is this red line right here. Looks like it was invented in the 80s and has made some significant improvements in efficacy. Still doesn't match those fluorescent tubes. Those are still more efficient. Okay, but compare the compact fluorescent here all the way down to the incandescent. It's quite a big improvement. Finally, let's talk about LEDs. LEDs are this bright blue, all right? And they were invented, looks like somewhere in the 90s, right here. And when they were invented, they didn't have a very high efficacy. But take a look at the amazing improvements that this technology has had over the last 30 years here. It is improving like crazy. And we are now in very high efficacy standards. Okay, so this chart comparing the different types gives you a visual on how those efficacies compare. We talked about in the last video, just the numbers, but this chart really shows you visually. It makes a huge difference to specify those LEDs. Now let's bring it back to the California requirements. Remember that 45 lumens per watt? I have kind of taken that over here and drawn. Here's 45 on our chart, this dashed line right here. Okay, notice that there are no incandescents that meet this requirement. Incandescents are not allowed. Okay, most of your other types of lighting do meet the requirements. So our compact fluorescents are right here. They're above the cutoff. Your tube fluorescents are right here. And there are some other types of lights, right? Halogen and metal halide that all meet the California requirements. Our second category of mandatory requirements for residential lighting in California are lighting controls. And here is a table of those lighting control requirements from your residential lighting guide. On the left here, we see a list of different residential spaces: hallways and closets, kitchens, bathrooms, laundry rooms and utility rooms, garages, and all other rooms. That would include bedrooms, living rooms, etc. Okay, dining rooms, family rooms, most of your other rooms. And here are, along the top of the chart, some different requirements for lighting controls. So it turns out in this category right here, it is mandatory that all of these spaces have manual on-off controls. Okay, this means they're not automatic on a timer or a motion sensor. They can have timers and motion sensors, but they must also have the manual on and off. You've got to be able to turn it on and off when you want to. Your second category right here is called a vacancy sensor or dimmer. Okay, and I'm going to go into much more detail in a minute about what exactly a vacancy sensor or dimmer is. For right now, let's just talk about where they're required. Turns out hallways and closets, not required. Kitchens, mostly not. Okay, mostly you're not required to have a vacancy sensor or a dimmer, but there are some specific lamp types that do require it, so you do need to look into more detail on that one. Okay. Bathrooms, laundry rooms, and garages. This is the little bit tricky part. At least one luminaire, or lighting fixture, okay, must be controlled by a vacancy sensor. So in your bathroom, you've got to have at least one light fixture that's controlled by a vacancy sensor. Okay. All other lights in the room, you could have multiple different lights, as you know, can be switched manually, vacancy sensor, some other way, motion sensor, any other way that you like. But you've got to have at least one that has that vacancy sensor. Finally, all other rooms, remember this is your bedrooms, living rooms, etc. Like the kitchens, the vacancy sensor is mostly not required. Okay. So let's break down those requirements and talk about switches in specific. Here's an example of a couple of different types of switches. So the California requirements are, remember, that all of your rooms must include a manual on-off. Okay. You're not allowed to bypass the dimmer or vacancy sensor. Okay, no cheating. And finally, you must separate out your under cabinet lighting and your exhaust fans to their own switch. Moving on to dimmers. Okay. It's required that dimmers provide at least a 65% power reduction. It's required that dimmers also include a full off setting. Okay. There are some requirements for reduced flicker. So dimmer switches and dimmer controls have gotten better over the years. And finally, it's required that you provide three-way circuits. Your light can be on, your light can be off, or it can be dimmed. And your switch has to restore the dimmer to whatever setting it was last set at when you turn the light on. For example, okay, I have a dimmer in my bathroom and I keep it pretty dim. Okay, so I'm using the bathroom, I set it at a dim mode, I turn it off and I walk away. Then later, maybe in the middle of the night, okay, I go in, I turn the light on as I walk into the bathroom. That light should go to the previous setting automatically. It would stay at the low dim level. So I'm not blasted with this amazing amount of light in the middle of the night. All right, so this is an energy savings setting so that when your user dims the light, right, it stays at the dim mode and doesn't automatically pop back up to the full energy use. Okay. The text here, the residential lighting guide, notes that it's important to correctly match your dimmer with the type of lighting load. Okay, so please read more carefully into that one. Our last topic of under the mandatory lighting controls is vacancy sensor. What is a vacancy sensor? You might not be familiar with it, but you're probably familiar with an occupancy sensor. An occupancy sensor is a control that has usually a motion detector. When you walk into the room, it notices the motion and turns the light on. When you walk out of the room and there's no activity, the sensor will notice, and after a period of time, it will turn the light off. So that's an occupancy sensor. It has an auto on and an auto off. Okay. Vacancy sensors are a little bit different. They require that the user turn the light on manually. Okay, so when you walk into the room, it does not automatically turn on the lights. Okay, you have to manually turn on the lights. However, when you walk out and the room is vacant, hence the name, all right, it will notice and turn the light off. So a vacancy sensor has a manual on and an automatic off function. Okay, that's right here, manual control. Oh, excuse me. It's also required that there also be a manual off to the switch. Okay, because remember, every room needs a light that has manual on and off. Okay, it's required that it be a manual on. No automatic on function is allowed at all. All right, and finally, it's required that the auto off function happen within 20 minutes. So the basic thing that you need to remember here is that in bathrooms, laundry rooms, and garages, you're required to have at least one light fixture use a vacancy sensor, right? And the vacancy sensor will need the user to turn the light on, but then it will automatically turn the light off if someone leaves the room without turning it off. Moving on, the last section of this video here is going to focus on the requirements and recommendations for kitchens and requirements and recommendations for baths. So we're talking in general about the lighting design for those rooms. First of all, let's cover the requirements for kitchens. First of all, your lights must be high efficacy. All permanently installed lights must be high efficacy. If you are specifying something unusual, there's a chance that it might not meet the requirements and will have to go through a certification process. Second, your under cabinet lighting must be switched separately from other lighting. Next, a manual control is required for all lighting. You've got to be able to turn it on and off manually. And a dimmer or vacancy control is required for all lighting. Mostly we use the dimmer to satisfy this requirement. Moving on to some recommendations for kitchen lighting design, it's recommended that you set up separate switching for the different areas and different functions of your kitchen. Okay? You can switch nooks, dining areas, adjacent spaces separately from your kitchen. Okay? You can switch different task areas separate from your general lighting. This adds flexibility and will, over time, reduce the lighting energy use. It's recommended that you provide sync task lighting. Give a separate light fixture on a separate switch. And it's also recommended that you use low glare countertops. If you select light colored matte finish countertops, this will increase light reflectance and also minimize glare. If you prefer to specify dark or highly reflective countertops, especially if your client is requesting them in particular, be sure to choose your lamps, your downlights, and your under cabinet luminaires with optics. Those are the filters and the screens and the housing, okay, that specifically reduce glare. So just be aware that glare can be an issue, especially for dark or highly reflective countertops, and plan your design accordingly. Well, here's from your textbook some highly dated illustrations of different lighting schemes that could be recommended in a kitchen. Okay, the schemes themselves still apply. The specific fixtures and certainly the materials and colors in these pictures are outdated and I wouldn't recommend. So take a look at the top left right here. We have for your general lighting a centralized surface mount fixture, and we have under cabinet lighting for task lighting. Moving on to the next picture to the right, they are keeping the central surface mount fixture for your general lighting, but task lighting is now provided by recessed downlights right here in the soffit. And one important thing that they are very accurately illustrating here is that these downlights can create kind of this scalloped pattern along your cabinets or your walls if they have a wall there, because they are so close to them. Also, take a look at this shadow right here. The spot directly under your upper cabinets is going to be shadowed. Moving to the bottom left picture, we see a scenario in which both the general lighting and the task lighting are provided by the same set of luminaires. This strip right here and strip right here are providing the general lighting for the room as well as the task lighting for these work areas at the countertops. Okay. And those individual heads on the tracks can be aimed exactly where you need them. And let's finally move to the bottom right here. In this scenario, we've got three different lighting systems going on. We've got a central pendant. The central pendant is providing both general or ambient light, and it's also providing task light for this eating function that's happening right below it. Okay. We've got under cabinet light back here, providing task light to the countertops. And finally, there is some soffit lighting up here sitting above your upper cabinets. This is providing both general light as it bounces around the room and also accent lighting. I'm moving on to bathrooms. We're going to talk about requirements and then also some recommendations. And we'll throw in laundry rooms, utility rooms, and garages in this category. Right? It's required that all permanently installed light fixtures be high efficacy. There's that word again. It's required that any under cabinet lighting you provide be switched separately from other lighting. Manual control is required for all. Your exhaust fans must be switched separately from the lighting, or it's possible that you have a control where they are switched on together, but the lighting can be turned off. Why is this? It's because people like to leave the bathroom fan running after they have used the bathroom and walk out, and maybe they'll come and turn it off later. Okay, but if they're going to do that, if they're going to use that function, we don't want to also be providing light to an empty room. So it's an energy savings there. And finally, it's required that you provide a vacancy control for at least one luminaire in the space. Okay. There are some situations where a dimmer meets this requirement, but in general, most cities, most municipalities will require that vacancy control, at least one in a bathroom. Let's move on to some design recommendations. First of all, when you are specifying your lighting fixture or luminaire, you need to choose a UL rating, that's Underwriter's Laboratory, of damp or wet. The damp rating is appropriate for everywhere in the bathroom except for over the tub and the shower. So if you're over the tub or in the shower enclosure, you need to choose the wet rating. You can provide the wet rating throughout the bathroom. That's fine too. It can be. But you only need at least the damp rating. Next, consider some barriers where a curtain or door might limit your ambient lighting. This is really basic, but don't create a situation that by pulling a curtain or shutting a door, you suddenly have no light in a particular area. Right? And this happens sometimes when people don't provide a light over a shower, but have a full height barrier of some sort. Suddenly you pull that curtain, you close the door, and it's dark in your shower area, and that's not safe for your client. Next, especially in a bathroom area, you want to prevent shadows, and we're talking about the grooming function here. If you only have one light and it's a down light, You can get shadows under your nose and maybe your cheekbones and under your chin, and it's hard to perform those grooming functions. So bath bars, that's one way to distribute light more evenly. Those are kind of vertical fixtures that go to either side of your mirrors. Or wall sconces in general will distribute light more evenly. Next, it's recommended that you add light to your deep cabinets and closets. The reference here specifically recommends surface mounted lights, but you could use whatever is appropriate for your situation. It's just a really nice feature to have light in your cabinets and closets. And finally, design for safety. Okay, this comes up if you have only one light in your bathroom, and it must be controlled by a vacancy sensor. Well, if someone is in the shower and they've pulled that curtain or closed a shower door, sometimes the vacancy sensor doesn't see them and the lights might turn off while someone's in a shower. So if this is the case and you only have that one light and it's the vacancy sensor, consider installing two sensors, one in the general room and one in the shower area, or perhaps the toilet compartment, or you would have your own light in a toilet compartment, never mind that part. But a dual technology device will make sure that your sensor can detect occupants at all times. Okay, as our last slide for this video, we have these lovely illustrations from your textbook. The lighting scheme on the left, so we're over here, has some recessed downlights. They're right here, these little circles. Okay, they're going to be providing your general or ambient light. And it's got this strip right here under the soffit to provide task lighting in the grooming area and the toileting areas. These are some good recommendations. You definitely need task lighting in that area. However, it's probably not the best that you can do for your grooming tasks because all of the light is coming from above, even that wall washing light, even though it's bouncing off the wall and you do get a little bit of forward light, so it's better than just having the recessed light above, but you can still do better. And here's one way that you can do better. Now we have far updated features from these now, but it's illustrating that your general or ambient lighting is being provided by recessed downlights, and then your task lighting for the grooming area is being provided by these bath bars, and they are lights that are mounted to either side of your mirror, so that light is being provided to the face and torso from multiple different heights. Look, from a little bit below your face all the way to above your face. So the different angles really helps to fill in those areas and provide the best task light. All right, that was it for our lighting lecture. In the first video, we talked about some lighting basics and some specific terms that had to do with lighting, kind of a vocabulary lesson. And we also talked about the characteristics of different lighting sources. In the second video, we covered California mandatory requirements for efficacy and lighting controls. And we also talked about different lighting design recommendations for kitchens and bathrooms. What I'd like you to do now is to practice this on your own. So take out a floor plan, one that I've given you or one on your own, and I'd like you to do a design exercise and draw in different types of lighting and their switches. Right, so you're going to create a lighting plan on your own to practice all the concepts that we just covered. Thanks everyone, and have a great week, and I'll see you next time.